All right. Welcome back to Thirst for Knowledge. Round 8.
Round 8.
Whiskey. I think we've hit Ben's favorite.
Yay. Even having my nose, hooray, we made it.
So what are you drinking?
An old-fashioned.
Ah, very nice. Very classic.
It's done right with a big, giant, singular ice cube in the middle.
Yeah.
Some bitters, some simple syrup. I'm using Angel's Envy whiskey, which I really like, and some maraschino cherries, actually a bunch of them, and a little bit of syrup, like
very nice.
Cherry syrup, gives it that color.
I have I would say it's a paper plane, except I had to substitute an ingredient. So we're going to call it a balsa wood plane.
Balsa wood plane?
Yeah, a paper plane is equal parts whiskey, Aperol. It's supposed to be Amaro Nonino, which is Aperol light, but I have Campari instead, and lemon juice. And it's a super simple recipe because it's just equal parts of all of them. Shaky, shaky with some ice.
Cheers.
So, salud. And that's actually really nice. I will confess to not being a whiskey drinker. It's not my fave, but that's a nice cocktail.
It is nice. It looks very pretty.
It does, yeah. I have to try the actual version of it someday.
Rob, I'm sure you're going to listen to this. I would love to try a paper plane in one of your bougie places.
You just make it yourself.
No, I want Rob to take it.
Okay, well, there you go. Rob, take Ben for a paper plane.
Rob, hurry up. He's the nicest guy. I love Rob.
Okay, you just got a shout out on a podcast. That's awesome.
That's great. In the first Ocean's 11 movie, George Clooney sits at a table with whatever her name is, and he orders a whiskey in the classiest way. He's sitting there, Julia Roberts, thank you. And the waitress comes by, can I get you anything? And he orders a whiskey and a whiskey. He opens his thumb and index finger wide. I'll have a whiskey, and then he pinches them together. And a whiskey. And that's all he says. I'll have a whiskey and a whiskey. And that's all he says. And the server brings him a tumbler of whiskey and a shot.
There you go.
So I tried that. I was actually in Vegas, and I went to a fancier type place with my coworkers, and the server came by, and I just looked at her and I said, I'll have a whiskey and a whiskey. And then I got back to the conversation with my friend. Kind of a jerk thing to do. But it worked, and I got a really fancy whiskey, and I paid through the nose for it, apparently. But it was cool. I don't know what it is.
I have an enduring question that I've had for a long time. What is the difference between whiskey, Scotch, and bourbon? Because they all kind of taste the same to me.
Bourbon and Scotch are both types of whiskey, but they have differences in their ingredients and how they're made and their flavor profile. Bourbon is made from at least 51% corn, while Scotch is made from malted barley. Bourbon is aged in charred oak barrels for years, where Scotch is aged in oak barrels for at least 3 years. Or longer.
And bourbon has to be a new barrel.
Mm-hmm.
So used bourbon barrels end up in Scotland to age Scotch because apparently you need a new barrel every time.
And then you can also just tell when you're drinking it. Bourbon is sweeter and smoother and vanilla-y and caramel-y, and Scotch is very more smoky and woody, and I prefer bourbon over Scotch.
I don't drink enough to have a preference. I will say that having taken Dimos to Scotland for a significant birthday and having done a proper Scotch tasting, there are Scotches that I like better than others. I do not like the peated ones. Not a fan.
I have a friend of a friend, kind of a neighbor who lives nearby, loves Scotch. Absolutely loves Scotch. And he invited some people over, and I knew he loved Scotch. And in my head, that just means whiskey. So I brought a nice bottle of whiskey as a gift, and he refused it.
Oh, how rude.
He didn't want it. Scotch only. And he was very polite, very gracious about it. And he sent me on my way with something else in addition to what I brought, which was kind of cool, actually.
Okay, that's better.
Like Scotch. My goodness.
Yes. Did you tell him that Scotch is actually a whiskey?
He knows. Oh, he knows.
You could be that person.
No, it's. I thought it was the whole Scotch bourbon world. There's a lot of raised noses at people. So pinkies out. Lots of very proper, clear distinctions. People have very strong allegiances to what their brand or type of whiskey is. They don't ever want to go away from it.
So I know that you had heard of this website already, but I hadn't. It's called Compound Interest. And he creates really cool graphics, the chemist, of the chemicals and things. And there was one for whiskey, right? Yeah. So loosely, to make whiskey, it's dried barley or whatever grain. You ground it, and the husks and the debris are removed. You mash it, and water is added to dissolve the sugars. And then there's fermentation and distillation and aging and bottling, right? So some of the flavors that come out in that, there's lactones from the oak barrels that's picked up in the aging process that give that woody coconut flavor in its trans form and a spicy coconut flavor in its cis form. And what we're talking about is something called isomers. So these are compounds that have the same molecular formula, but different arrangements in space. And this is what made every person that's had to take organic chemistry go slightly crazy. And because the arrangements of atoms in space in a molecule can drastically change how that molecule reacts. And
no kidding.
Its properties, right? Huh. And so when I was doing organic chemistry, we had these little models, right? They're sort of like ball and stick models that you can make the compound and kind of see it. And so every exam, all you heard was pop, 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 as people were popping and unpopping little molecules. So isomers, right? So so there's different types of isomers. Cis and trans isomers happen with a double bond between two carbon atoms. So that means two electrons out of the carbons are bonded together, right? Looks like a little equal sign. And that makes only two conformations possible that differ from each other by a twist of 180 degrees at one of the carbons of the double bond. And they end up looking like mirror images of each other. But those mirror images, like you said, are very different. And so one mirror image gives this very woody flavor, and the other mirror image gives a really spicy flavor. And so these are the cis and trans isomers of these lactones. And it's a good thing I have a cocktail because I have never wanted to relive organic chemistry ever again. But here we are.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So there's
same molecule, but just backwards, completely changes the flavor.
Backwards. Mirror image, right? So technically,
not
if you're looking at it, or if you're that molecule, your ability to interact and react with things is different because of the way you're arranged in your conformation in space. Same thing happens with things like proteins. You can twist a protein in a different way, and it won't work. It'll only work in one conformation. So there are phenols in whiskey that contribute to that smoky flavor and the bitterness. And this is where using things like peat fires to dry the barley malt adds these phenols to there are aldehydes. So syringaldehyde is a spicy, woody aroma, and one of our favorites, vanillin. Let's see, furfural is an almond-like flavor, and hexanol gives grassy notes. And of course, esters. Got to have some esters in there for the fruit. Esters. Including isoamyl acetate, which is banana, which is what I used to make in my chemistry lab. Banana. But the esters can also cause some cloudiness in the whiskey too. So
interesting.
I thought there's some cool chemistry of your whiskey.
That's actually very interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. So what other fun whiskey facts?
So many. Let's do a funny one. And I want to bring up the whiskey war, which is my favorite thing.
There's a war.
There was indeed a war. And it was between Canada and Denmark.
I didn't think Canada went to war with anybody.
Oh, they did. They went to war big time with Denmark. There's a small uninhabited island called Hans Island in the Nares Strait between Greenland and Canada. And it's 1.3 square kilometers. It's up in the Arctic, and nothing grows there. Nothing lives there. No animals, mate there, nothing. It's just this flat little thing sticking out of the ocean. And what happened was, how does it begin? Denmark went there, and they sailed by, and they planted a flag.
As you do.
And this is in, I believe it started in the 50s. And then Canada sailed by, saw their flag. Took down their flag, folded it nice and neat, raised their own flag, and left a bottle of Canadian whiskey. And when Denmark sailed by again, they took down the Canadian flag, raised their own flag again, drank the whiskey, and left some schnapps along with a sign that says "Welcome to the Danish Island." And back and forth this went.
Up in the ante.
And back and forth this went. It was called the Whiskey War. And whenever one team showed up, they would take down the other team's flag and leave their own drink the other team's alcohol and leave their own. And since it was so nice and cold, and since nothing ever went there, everything was nicely chilled. Everything was preserved. Nothing broke. Nothing got swept away. And then in 2022, they finally ended the war, which was actually upsetting to the Canadian and Danish navies because they liked it.
I bet they did.
So now there is a line drawn straight down the middle of the island. They agreed to split it half and half, one flag on either side, and there's no official word if there's actually a count of either alcohol waiting.
Leave it to the Danes and the Canadians to have a very civilized disagreement about something.
God, it's not even a war. It's just people being friendly.
I know. So nice. I mean, minus the flag planting thing that's got some ick on it, just because historically.
Actually, I don't know. Maybe it has some ick on it.
I mean, historically, probably not from the Canadians, but
Not from the Canadians.
No.
No more ick than raising your flag there on your own soccer team or whatever. I think it's just funny. And when they took down the other team's flag, it was never desecrated in any way. No. It was neatly folded and left beside. I would take down the Danish flag. And I will put it next to my Canadian whiskey, or they would take down the Canadian flag and put it next to their delicious schnapps. So if you want your flag back, you got to drink our booze. It's fantastic.
It is. I found another old article.
I love these.
I do too. This is from July 1893 in the Indian Medical Gazette, and it was called Facts About Whiskey. It was a letter to the editor, and it was about there was an adulteration of whiskey in the Indian market. And the letter writer wants to make sure everybody knows what makes a good whiskey.
Okay.
So they say, it is highly essential in the production of good whiskey that the malt from which it is manufactured should be made from the finest barley in perfect condition, and to avoid the disagreeable sulfurous flavor present in whiskey made from coke-dried malt. And coke here being not the drug or the soda, but a gray, hard, and porous coal-based fuel with a high carbon content, mainly used in iron ore smelting, but it was used like peat is used, burned to dry the barley malt. Continuing, that it be dried with the finest and driest quality of peat. It is also essential for fermenting purposes that the manufacture should be carried on in a pure atmosphere with an abundance of ozone, and the distilleries which produce the finest whiskey are situated either high up among the hills or very near the seashore. The purity of the water used should also be unquestionable. The author also advocated, this is an interesting little twist at the end, for aging the whiskey in India since the heat would speed up the process. He says, whiskey imported in wood matures very rapidly in India, as much probably in 1 year as in a colder climate in 3. Some Scotch distillers now adopt the practice of storing it in this country and reshipping it at the expiration of a certain period. So there you go. That's what makes a good whiskey, apparently.
Okay. Well, there is a whiskey company today. I mean, somebody thinks letting it store in the heat of India is the way to go. There's a company that believes storing your whiskey in barrels aboard a ship is the way to go. And there are, I wish I'd written down the name of this whiskey company, but they make the whiskey and then they barrel it and then they put it aboard a ship and they just keep it out at sea for however many years until they bring it back.
Interesting.
And then, well, not at sea, but offshore.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's within sight of the land, but apparently it's the gentle rocking that keeps it its own unique flavor. So if somebody says keep it in the heat of India, and someone makes sense, someone says keep it on a nice cool boat. Do you know where the word whiskey comes from?
I do not. I have seen it spelled different ways, though.
It is spelled two different ways, with or without the E.
Mm-hmm.
Whiskey with an E means you're drinking whiskey from the United States and Ireland. Whiskey with no E means you're drinking Scotland, Canadian, or most of EU whiskeys. But the word whiskey itself comes from the Gaelic word uisce beitha, meaning water of life.
Like aquavite.
Sure.
Aquavit is a Norwegian kind of Scandinavian liquor.
That's what I have. A weird triangle prism-shaped bottle, the aquavit.
Yeah. It's pretty strong stuff.
It's been sitting there in my living room for like 9 years.
There you go.
Never opened it. Oh, okay. All right. The first written mention of whiskey comes from an Irish text in 1405.
Wow.
Documenting the death of a chieftain who drank too much.
Yeah, that can happen. Do you have a sense of where, I think we were speaking during the break, that came from monasteries used to make it?
Yes, it has a monastic origin, going as far back as the 12th century, back to medieval monks in Ireland and Scotland who learned how to make it from people just basically traveling through Europe. They just picked up little tips and tricks from people who happened by and need stays for a while. And over time, they developed the proper way of making I don't want to say rudimentary, but the very first whiskeys in Ireland and Scotland. And it's spread from there.
That's cool. I tell you, those monks, they used to have all the fun.
What else are you going to do?
That's true. So I found a 2018 paper published in PLOS One from the Texas A&M University, looking at corn variety and terroir in Texas on the flavor and alcohol yield in new-made bourbon whiskey. Now, do you know what new make is? New make bourbon.
No.
So new make is freshly distilled and unaged spirit, which technically means it can't really be called whiskey because it hasn't matured, but it's the starting materials of an aged whiskey.
Okay.
So they took 3 different commodity yellow dent hybrid corn varieties. No idea. I'm sure it's just one variety of corn. I have no idea which one it is. That were grown on different farms in Texas. And they used a sensory panel, so like taste testers. They also used HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography, gas chromatography, mass spec, and olfactometry. So they found that the different Texas terroirs impacted both the flavor and the alcohol yield of the corn. And benzaldehyde seems to be an important chemical marker in the corn for plant breeders and distillers to consider because it is linked to an increase of the desirable congeners, which we've talked about, which were, those compounds that add a lot of flavor to the whiskey, and aromas in the whiskey. So if you're looking to breed corn specifically for whiskey making, you want to make sure it makes plenty of benzaldehyde when you ferment it. But
Benzaldehyde.
Yep, benzaldehyde. Not formaldehyde. You don't want formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is icky. Not good to drink.
No.
And it smells bad. Benzaldehyde.
Okay.
Or benzaldehyde.
My aldehyde.
Yeah, your aldehyde. There you go. That's how you can think about it. Yeah.
Drink my aldehyde, everybody.
Makes for good whiskey. We're got the giggles. It's an even number episode.
It's an even episode.
Yep. But I thought that was interesting because we've talked about terroir in different episodes and how the unique composition of the soil, and a lot of that has to do with the microbiology of the soil, produces different results, even if you're growing the exact same thing. And we experienced this. We were recently in Sonoma. We were talking to one of the winemakers, and he had a property where one half of the property couldn't be a dry grow. He had to irrigate it. And the other half of the property could, because of the different soil compositions. And we tasted the 2, I think it was Pinot Noirs that came from those different parts of the vineyard, and they tasted pretty different. So
really?
Yeah, same grape, same vines.
Yeah,
the vines are all clones of each other.
Before.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
That's fascinating. So, what other whiskey facts have you got for us?
During Prohibition in the United States, the production and sale of whiskey was banned.
Of course. Yep.
But whiskey survived through Prohibition better than any other alcohol made in the U.S.
Really?
One specific loophole. Just one. Medicinal whiskey.
Love it.
Doctors were prescribing it everywhere. There were distilleries being sent out with specific licenses to create a very clean, very sterilized version of whiskey. Basically, it was a whiskey production facility where everything was super clean, and government regulators came to inspect. These are being distributed in small bottles. So you don't want to get drunk off this stuff, heavens no. But you might need it for some ailment. And so as long as you're able to prescribe a specific amount of whiskey, and you're able to deliver the whiskey in specific small little bottles, you're good to go. There
you go. Man, that must have been a crazy time. Like, wasn't cocaine a medicine then too?
Cocaine used to be a medicine, sure.
Yeah. Some wild rides.
One of my favorite Prohibition stories, it was the incredible explosion of Jewish communities around the country. And there were synagogues in black parts of town and Chinese parts of town and Italian parts of town. The synagogues all over the place for one specific reason, is because it was a religious thing that you were allowed to have wine if you're Jewish. So there were people signing up everywhere on paper to become rabbis, wink, wink.
Yeah.
And they can just give everyone wine.
But I wonder, I mean, like Catholics, that's part of their religious practice as well. Was it not considered?
I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm Jewish, so I know the Jewish part of it. I'm sure if I'm a Catholic.
Yeah, right. So what do you think happens with all of this waste that you use making whiskey, right? Because you take all this grain, you mash it up.
I've often wondered.
And then you take that and you ferment it into beer, essentially. And then you take that and further distill. I mean, there's waste all along the way, right? So it turns out that you can take some of that waste and subject it to anaerobic digestion. And this is breakdown by organisms that are anaerobic. And that means they don't use oxygen to survive, right? So quick primer, aerobic respiration uses oxygen to generate energy. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is the cell's energy currency, right? ATP gains and loses electrons, and that's how a lot of things are powered in your body. Oxygen is an important part of this process, and because it is the terminal acceptor of what is called the electron transport chain in your body. And that chain makes an electrical chemical gradient that drives ATP formation. Anaerobic respiration uses other elements, not oxygen, in this electron transport chain. And it doesn't generate as much energy as aerobic respiration. It's not as efficient. So a group out of the University College Cork in Ireland looked at the valorization of whiskey byproducts. And I had to look up this word. Valorization. Do you know what it is? Because I had to look it up. So it's the process of preserving or enhancing the price or value of something. It's like in the research community, it's turning research outputs into products. So valorization, can we use the sludge that's left over from whiskey for something else?
Sure.
So they use 3 anaerobic digestion systems and the whiskey byproducts, and they measured the methane production from these systems. And they measured methane because you can use methane for other things. You can use it to power. So all the systems had similar methane yields, and it was enough to contribute up to 44% of the thermal energy needed at the distillery. So over a third of the energy that the distillery was using could be generated by digesting the distillery's own waste product.
That's awesome.
I know. So they then also looked at these 2-phase digestion systems, which are just like digest a bit and then put it in a different system, digest some more. And those had greater yield, and they could produce methane that could go on to make volatile fatty acid. And these are compounds such as acetic acid, a butyric acid, a proic acid, and these are used to produce bioplastics and biopreservatives. So the potential market value of the extraction of these acids from the whiskey byproducts was 6.76 million euros per 50 million liter facility, which is about 14 euro cents per liter of whiskey. So a liter of whiskey, and you can use that to make money, energy and monies.
All right. Whiskey, specifically bourbon, is my favorite of the spirits, and now even more so. That is fantastic.
And to me, it just underscores that bacteria really can do anything. Like, there's a bacteria out there for everything. They're just like, you got whiskey byproducts? Sure, we'll eat that. You've got plastic?
We'll eat
sure, we'll eat that. Well, you have an oil spill? Sure, we'll eat that. Sorry, I have in my head like
a t-shirt right there.
Like, yeah, sure, we'll eat that.
Yeah,
There's a little bacteria.
Telling you, the even episodes.
They're the funnest.
Yeah, the funnest.
Maybe we need to start doing like a shot before the odd episodes so they're equally as fun. No, because then we'll be slurring our words by the time we get to the even one.
No, I kind of think it's funny. Oh, well, you know what? We have episodes still to go, so we could give it a shot.
Dad joke.
Dad joke. I'm a dad. All I do.
Yeah. What other whiskey fun facts are on your radar?
There's the Scotch Whiskey Act of 1915, which regulated the production of Scotch whiskey, including aging requirements, a strict minimum of 3 years, and the definition of different types of Scotch, single malt, blended, etc. And this helps protect the reputation and quality of Scotch whiskey. Anyone offers you a Scotch whiskey that's a year old, not Scotch whiskey. 3 years.
They're lying.
Older. They're big liars.
That's cool. I always find those laws, so that's like the appellation of origin in France and the Reichsgebot in Germany. You have these laws about how to essentially control the quality of a product. It's always fascinating. Another fascinating thing I found. So there was this photographer based out of Phoenix, Ernie Button, and he started photographing the dregs of his whiskey at the bottom of the glass. And he used colored lights projected underneath the glass to be able to visualize the patterns that they made. He's like, these are super cool. I wonder how this happens.
Beautiful.
So he dialed 1-800-FIND-A-SCIENTIST. I don't know how he found the scientist, but he reached out to Howard.
Please let that be a real number.
I know, that'd be awesome. To Howard Stone, who's a professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at Princeton, who studies how fluids flow. So the scientists discovered that as the alcohol in the whiskey evaporated, the concentration of water increases, and this is what makes the flows that create the patterns that Ernie photographs. There are also surfactants, and surfactants is something that reduces the surface tension of water, and polymers that attach to the glass that provide a template for the water as it flows around. And the scientists are currently doing more testing to determine exactly which molecules in the whiskey are contributing to the shapes that you see at the bottom of the glass. But the pictures are gorgeous.
Yes, they are. You shared it with me. They're fantastic.
Yeah, they're really pretty.
But they make a whiskey and they just wait for it to evaporate, or is it?
No, he drinks the whiskey.
A whiskey drink.
You drink the whiskey. Yeah. You know how after a glass of wine, there's some sediment and stuff at the bottom of the glass, and he was noticing that there's a little bit left over. He just, I don't know what possessed him, but he shined a light and took a photograph and shone.
And that's why science is so cool. I wonder what this will do. That's it. That's what science is. What's this gonna do?
Yeah.
I wonder what happens if I put a light on it.
Yep. Yeah. What happens if I freeze this? I freeze this. I will say that a lot of science is oops, and then after the oops, you're like, oh, huh. It's a lot of accidental discoveries in science.
I think, what was it? Crazy glue was discovered on accident, something like that.
Oh, penicillin was big old accident.
See, TV, that was discovered on accident. Nobody set out to make a TV.
No, they did not.
Nope. I'm trying to figure out some other problem. I'm going to set up this little contraption so see if I could test something really quick. And all of a sudden, TV's an accident.
So what other interesting things about whiskey?
I know that in between 1791 and 1794, there was a whiskey rebellion in the United States.
Okay.
It was a moment when the frontier farmers in Pennsylvania fought against the federal tax on whiskey that they made. And it underscored whiskey's importance, both as a commodity and a currency in early American society.
Well, I just hope it wasn't made with lead pipes. Maybe that was just the rum.
Nice callback to last episode.
Yeah, well, Gotta keep a thread.
Oh, well, no, I had a whiskey war. I got my whiskey rebellion.
Yeah, got all the fun stuff.
Between bourbon and Scotch, where the E in the whiskey comes from. I said my Ocean's 11 story, which I'm still very proud of.
It's awesome.
And whiskey betha, the origin of the word for whiskey. Nice.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. So we always remind people to drink responsibly on our podcast because alcohol had a lot of side effects. Mm-hmm. And I found an article that would agree with us. This is going back to Texas Medical Journal in the late 1800s, I believe.
Bring it.
And the author starts by quoting Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson was rejoicing on the reduction on duties on wine, since wine had gotten too expensive and so many people were drinking harder alcohol. So Jefferson thought this was a good thing to be able to drink wine too. But the author of this piece did not agree with Thomas Jefferson, which is, I think, a bold statement. To make, bold stance. He said, in Mr. Jefferson's day, they do nothing of lager beer. Its consumption is something enormous. I suppose he would have exempted it from prohibition also, and it would have been most acceptable compromise to the large foreign element of our population and would be a tremendous vote getter. Nor did Mr. Jefferson know many things about wine and beer that have since been learned in the laboratory. Both contain alcohol. Surprise. More or less, and are intoxicating. That word never is to be taken as it is valued. It means poisoned. It is now known that alcohol taken regularly, even in the smallest quantities represent in wine and beer, is a large factor in the production of most chronic diseases, and notably in Bright's disease, which was the historical classification for kidney disease, a malady that carries off a large percentage of middle-aged men who should and who probably would live 15 to 20 years more. Just imagine being in your 40s and you got another good 20 years to go. At least you did in the late 1800s. So the author continues, no compromise with the demon alcohol. Pluck the evil out by the root. The war is on in Texas, and in the next campaign, we will elect a sensible and level-headed governor who will not veto the liquor bills as fast as a sensible legislature can pass them. There is no use in advocating preventive medicine so long as the state licenses Tom, Dick, and Harry to poison the people with alcohol.
Oh my goodness.
So, pre-prohibition teetotaling by a physician in Texas.
Man, even George Washington loved drinking. I mean, it goes back to the beginning.
Oh, I mean, it goes back to the first time people figured out you could do it.
Oh, yeah.
Although back then it was largely a safety thing. Like beer and wine were a lot safer to drink than the water most of the time. Yeah. So I thought that was particularly funny. Little teetotaler extract that managed to get published in a medical journal in Texas.
I found when George Washington himself left office and he was done, he was given a grand farewell party, and all the founding fathers are there, and all the other, effective governors are there, and important people. And they drank something about $15,000 of alcohol in today's money, and it was just insanity. They had 60 bottles of this type of wine and 50 bottles of some other kind of wine. But I remember they had a lot of whiskey and a lot of cider and and if I remember correctly, there was a punch, some fruity punch. All right. So I think it's kind of funny that our founding fathers were big drinkers, and then the same country they founded said no drinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I grew up in New England, and there are still vestiges of being founded by Puritans. So Connecticut, when I was younger, you could not buy alcohol after 8 p.m. and you certainly couldn't buy it on a Sunday. So yeah.
We could do an episode on blue laws.
The blue laws. Yeah, they're because I live in, we're in Virginia now, and you can only buy hard alcohol at a Virginia state liquor store because that obviously keeps people from drinking.
I had a business trip to Atlanta, Georgia once, and I wanted to get some Georgian whiskey, bring it home. Why not? So I went to the local supermarket, which is right next to my hotel, and they had no alcohol at all, just beer.
Yep.
And then I knew if I walked a little bit further, there was a Target or something, or Walmart or something like this. I went there.
Nope.
Nothing except beer. And so I asked somebody who works there and said, you have to go to a licensed liquor store, and you can only go between X hours and these days. And it's like, my goodness. So I went to some random liquor store, just quite a ways away from my little hotel from where I was staying for work. And it was like going to some weird library. It's the only place you can get it, and they know it. And they make sure everything is there, and everything was organized by continent and by type, and it was insanity. And put it all, which upset me the most, there were no Georgian whiskeys I can buy.
Oh no.
There's Georgian other things, but nothing whiskey. I was like, God, it was hysterical.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it was in Connecticut too. Like, you would go to the liquor store, there was a local one in our town. If you knew everybody by name, he would special order for you. It's a teeny store that still managed to have everything. And then when I moved to Seattle, I was like, why is there vodka in the CVS? Like, I was so confused. Like, wait a minute.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's different everywhere. So
everywhere. I visited a friend in Missouri. This is my last aside. I visited a friend in Missouri, and we're driving around, blah, 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 how to get gas. And we went to a gas station, and they still had the option, someone could pump your gas for you, or you could pump your own gas. And we went to pump our own gas. And in between these old-timey pumps with the little dial that turns to show you how much gas you've been pumping, there's this big giant metal tub full of ice, and there's a sign sticking out of the tub that says 1 free with every fill up. Cans of beer.
All right.
And I'm like, but we're driving. Okay, Missouri. There you go. Overland, Missouri. That's where it was. Overland.
Nice. I have an additional side that I think we mentioned also in the rum episode, is that there is bottles of whiskey that have gone to space in Blue Origin rockets and have come back down. I think maybe were served at one of the Christmas parties, but whiskey has made it up there. I don't remember. I'd have to ask Dimos what kind of whiskey it was, but I'm sure it was a good brand.
Whatever it is, if it's been to space, it has got my business.
But there's only a few bottles, right? It wasn't like they sent
Well, I'll be a patron of whatever company and got their stuff to space.
Yeah, apparently.
That's why I drink Coca-Cola and Pepsi equally. That's the
there you go. I love it. Like I said, it's good to have a standard. It's good to have a metric for how you make your decisions.
If it's been to space, I'll try it. There you go. I'll have any kind of cheese. Those have all been to space.
All right, that's all I have for whiskey, and I finished my cocktail. Good. So I think all that's left is to remind people that they're listening to Thirst for Knowledge, a podcast where two nerds talk about booze. And
thank you, everybody.
Please remember to drink and science responsibly.
Science responsibly.